Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are well into our 34th year, I interview writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they're planning for the future. It's a somewhat wider net, however. We do have occasionally painters, sculptors, other forms of art. And if you have an idea for a guest who might be a good guest for the Writer's Block, any form of art, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other original programming out of 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. It's a wonderful community asset, so stick with cable. We do have a writer tonight, and her name is JoeAnn Hart. She is a distinguished, nationally known writer because she is award-winning in short stories. She has been praised for novels. She's been praised for memoirs and for true memoir about murder. I'm going to look at my notes and stop stumbling. She just published High Wire Act and Other Tales, which won the prestigious Hudson Prize put out by the Black Lawrence Press. We're going to be talking about High Wire Act today. Stanford 76 is the true story of a murder, which I just mentioned, and also the novel Float by the Ashland Creek Press, a couple of excerpts of which are in High Wire Act, and also the novel Addled, published by Little Brown. JoeAnn Hart, very welcome back to the Writer's Block.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you again.
It's good to be back.
I mentioned before we started, I wanted to remind our audience, if they forgot, where you grow up and where did you go to school?
So I grew up in the Bronx, and then I went to the suburbs in Westchester, where I just was, actually, a couple of weeks ago for a reading at the Westchester Writers Center. So that was odd to be back there. And so, and then I had, for those who have read Stanford know that I dropped out of college, and I didn't go back to college till I had kids, and I figured I couldn't talk them into going to college unless I had a degree. So for years I worked, I chipped away at a degree at Harvard Extension. I didn't graduate till 1997, and then immediately went and got my MFA at Bennington College in writing literature.
That's quite a good story.
Yeah.
How did you find Gloucester?
Yeah, so Gloucester was because, for those who've read Stanford 76 know that at the end of it, I run off to Boulder, Colorado, and that's where I met my husband-to-be. So I met Gordon Baird, and I was dating his art director, and that's how we met. And eventually he moved the magazine, Musician Magazine, back to Gloucester, where he and his partner had always summered. And so in 1979, I moved to Gloucester.
79.
1979, it was quite a different place. 79.
Yes, it sure was.
Dragged me kicking and screaming, but now I can't imagine living any other place.
I can't either. I got here in 73.
73.
And it was, as you say, much different community.
Yeah, and it was the 70s. So it was like dark, it was a dark time. And so I think in 79 maybe might have been the Iran hostage crisis. And here we are all up again.
We survived.
Yeah.
The crises don't stop.
Yeah.
I want to talk about High Wire Act. I'm going to hold it up, and we also have a JPEG for the screen of the cover, High Wire Act, which just won the Hudson Prize at the Black Lawrence Press. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm not going to introduce a spoiler here by saying what the general topic is that the cohesive topic that unites all the stories. Will you tell us what that topic is?
I will. So first, about this gorgeous cover, this is a local artist. This artwork is by Hans Punt, here on Cape Ann. He lives in Lanesville. He's a collage artist. And when Black Lawrence Press asked what was I thinking of for a cover, and they sent me a link to Saatchi Art and said, go through this and see what, if anything, calls to you. And I said, this is Gloucester. I don't need Saatchi Art. And we went to Hans Punt's studio and took a bunch of photos, sent it to Black Lawrence Press, and they chose this and designed the cover.
Good.
So
I'm glad to plug him. Say the name again, please.
Hans Punt. It's Pundt. And I know him through he's shown at a number of galleries here in Gloucester. That's the Rocky Neck Cultural Center, I think, where. And
I'll have to keep him in mind for the show.
Great. So anyway,
I'm glad you mentioned him.
Yes, I'm glad I remembered, because it's just the best cover ever. And so this is a collection of short fiction. I've been writing short fiction since I started writing, which was actually fairly late, in the 90s. And my writing start was when I was at Harvard Extension, and I was taking a mandatory expository writing course, because when you're in the degree program at the Extension, you have to follow all the Harvard College requirements, the mandatory classes. And expository writing was one. And for those who don't, expository means basic, like just basic writing. And even then I was like, oh, it was like math. I was like, oh, I've got to take math, I've got to take this. But so I was in this instructor's class, Maxine Wadberg, and I'm just doing the assignments and la la la. And I was like, oh, this isn't so bad, this writing thing. And she actually called me into her office halfway through the semester and said, she goes, how long have you been writing? And I was like, well, since I've been in this class in September. And she goes, you are a writer. And she gave me a big stack of writing books and just sent me on my way. And she was my mentor throughout my whole writing life. And we are still good friends.
So I had asked before we started for you to mention someone who was a big influence, and that there.
That was her.
So it wasn't a grade school teacher.
No, I wasn't one of those kids who was always writing. Never. This was like late in my life. I thought I would be a social worker. I was doing at Harvard, I was doing social sciences with a gender studies minor. And it was actually, and that is what I graduated with. But I thought I'd go on to get my master's in social work, and instead I went and got a master's in writing and literature because of Maxine, who said, you're writing. And oddly, we've come full circle now. When she retired from Harvard, where she ran the Crimson Academy, she called and asked to join, to come back into my old writers group that she had started in the early 90s in Cambridge. And so she came full, and now we meet once a month. The writers
so this is
group.
not formal educational connection,
No, it's just a
writers
group. And that's one thing,
group.
like advice I always give to anybody, like an MFA is fine, writing classes are fine, but it's like a writers group. It's like find your people and get together with other writers, at least once a month, share your work. These are your peers. And this has been the same group I've been in since like 1996 in Cambridge. And we've gone from being weekly to we just meet once a month now. And mostly we bitch about writing. But when we are each other's first readers, that we have work.
So much of this material went by them.
All of it.
Well, you thank in the acknowledgement.
That's Raymond Street.
That group, the Raymond Street group, is the group you're referring to.
That's right. And yes, and so all these, I've been writing these stories since, the earliest one is 2006, but in this collection, but I have many more, and I wrote many during the MFA in 99 and 2000.
What is the theme that joins?
So out of all the stories I wrote, I put together a collection based with survival. Survival is the through line in all of this. That's why it's High Wire Act and other tales of survival. that this is there. It's all very. It's often referred to as climate fiction. It's also how do we survive a changing world and the changing climate and the crisis. And so there's a lot of animals in here. There's extinction issues. There's just how do humans survive in nature? Or how does nature survive with us?
Yes,
Yeah,
indeed.
yeah. So that's the through line in every story. Is that I selected all the stories having to do with survival.
So it has to do with you're jumping from the kind of the cliche worries that are in the newspapers and not nearly alarming enough, in my view, to the fact that it's already a question of survival.
Yeah.
Our survival, the planet's survival, or at
Yes.
least the rock will stay here,
Yeah.
but what's on it is up for
Right.
grabs.
Whether our species survives. I mean, other species are falling off left and right around us.
Oh,
And,
I think hundreds a day.
yeah, hundreds a day. It's startling. And so it's really we are through our own actions are making the planet is going to be not habitable for human survival. The climate in which we evolved that allowed humans to evolve is changing, and we don't know what that future is going to bring. And in fact, two of these stories are set in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
seem to go from standard contemporary fiction into science fiction very comfortably.
Yes.
There's a couple stories that are very, very futuristic, very dark, and people living essentially underground or
Right.
in
Yes. So that's
repressed
what
ways.
happens when you really what you write is all about the changing climate. When you really that's just where my mind went. And they're fairly recent stories in the past 3 or so years of your mind goes to the future. And the Germans, the Russians actually, since the 19th century, have had a form of literature that I don't know what the original Russian is, but in English it's called what if literature. What if this goes on? And that's sort of how I think of the ones set in the future are not exactly science fiction. They're the term that's used is speculative fiction, that we're speculating what's going to happen. So it's not like science fiction which usually involves other planets or robots or things like that. This is just speculating, and anything in these stories, the technology is already here, so.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Is there, I'd like to ask you to read a section
Sure.
of one or two of the stories.
Yeah.
Is there a story or a section of a story that kind of it would be a good example of the survival theme and the
Yes.
disasters around climate?
Oh, yes. I mean, I could. You want to hear a little bit of disaster?
Yes.
All right, I'll give you a little bit of disaster. Maybe we'll have time for non-disaster as well, because a lot of these stories there is survival. But so here is. So how about I'll read a couple of pages of High Wire Act, the title story.
That's the second story.
The second story is the title story, and it is one of the two speculative ones. And yeah. So I'll just read the first paragraph so you get the idea. So this is High Wire Act. The lilting voice that fell like water from the loudspeaker every morning predicted an almost perfect day. A sky as blue as my right eye, she called it. They have a way of letting us see the world through the odd detail. No matter, it's a blue sky and I'm an industrious soul, so my thoughts turned to laundry. I'd done the wash days before when it first started to rain, then waited for a dry spell to hang it. And waited. The dome was supposed to be weather resistant, but the drains are always clogged, so the weather has nowhere to go but through the wonky seams. And if untreated water touches my clothes, well then, I'll be in worse shape than when I started. The laundry was beginning to smell like a mushroom log, but a few hours in the open rotunda would soon cure that.
I love the hints you dropped that we're in a strange world.
Right.
The dome
The dome.
and the water clogging up.
Yeah, the constant rain.
The rotunda, the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of rain this summer.
Yes.
Yeah.
My lawn is greener than it's been in 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you comfortable with speculative fiction?
Yes, I am, because in fact, my writing project now, I actually have a book coming out next year that is not speculative, but what I've been working on, that book, next year's book, is already written. I'm finishing the edits right now, but what I've been working on is a series of short stories, and the first one in the series is in the book, Good Job, Robin. That's the second speculative one. So I am actually been working on a book-length series of stories all set like 200 years in the future. Oddly enough, in London, but I needed a cathedral for this story, and I could only get a cathedral in London, so that's where it's set.
Well, that's good. That's reassuring. You think we'll be around in 200 years?
Are we great? Are there a lot of us? Not particularly, but yes. So that I think humans will survive, but I don't think our cultures are going to survive. I think how we live is going to be very different, and where we live is going to be different.
I asked a class once how long they thought humans would last, and I think the longest estimate was 50 years. They were I thought they'd be bright and young and say, oh, well,
no,
this
generation is, we've done an awful thing to these kids, handing them this planet that we've basically destroyed. And we can turn it around. I mean, we have the technology, we know what to do, but it needs political will, and it needs global political will. And that's what is unlikely to happen.
Getting global I have a note here that I can't read.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
yes,
so I won't
yeah.
try. That happens too often these days.
I know, I've got this arthritic thumb. I can't read my writing at all anymore.
Who is, in this story, this puzzled me a bit. I didn't know how to define him. Who is Donaker?
Oh, Donica. Donica is the next door neighbor.
Donica's the next door neighbor.
In High Wire Act. Yeah, Donica is the neighbor in the rotunda that basically, Donica is, next door neighbor. That they live in like this dome, and basically you think of the little units going around looking into a rotunda, and they each have a little balcony. And so on her next door balcony, of which they're caged, they're separate from each other, is Donaker.
Donaker, okay.
Yeah.
I picked up some hints that perhaps he was surveilling them and worked for the man.
Yeah. Oh, yes, no.
No.
Okay. He's definitely not. He's not surveillance. That's all done electronic. Yeah.
Of course.
No, he was actually resisting what was going on, but in the end, he didn't.
The first story in the book I wanted to ask you about is a story about an ugly American who's being rude to natives who are trying to do something about the coral.
Yeah.
And it looks almost as if it's about class rather than the environment. Did you have double themes in mind for that?
Yes, there were a lot of themes in that one. That one is the first story I've ever written on commission. And so, yes, that was written for the Berlin Literature Festival in 2017. So I was invited to the festival to present Float, because the Berlin Festival's theme that year was the oceans. So I was invited to present Float, and then part of this was that to commission to write a piece of short fiction. And they were it had to do with the oceans, and and for me, it needed to be climate change, and then it was like it's also supposed to be loosely based on the Odyssey, on Odysseus. So actually, there's some of those themes going on in there. I haven't heard the class one yet, but there are multiple themes, and So what is going on is that like the climate crisis around the world is going to hit countries and populations differently. And the people who are going to be more impacted are the ones who have least contributed to the climate change. I mean, the people along coastal, in countries along the coast who have, don't use any fossil fuels at all, they're the ones who are going to get wiped out first. So in class issues, it's definitely a global, it's climate justice. That's a climate justice issue and climate equity. How do we make it that right? We can't ask them not to stop using fossil fuels and not, and keep them subdued so that we can keep using. So
there's a great deal about climate and racism in this month's Scientific American. It's it's nice to see that research being given a lot of
and then within our own country, like the worst polluted areas are always people of color are living right around those. That's where they put all because there's not enough voice to say, no, we don't want that here. We don't want that in our backyard.
Yeah. I've got a couple questions for you.
Yep.
I want to ask how you choose your point of view. Some of these stories are in the first person. Some of them are third person omniscient.
Right.
There's one or two epistolary stories with second person. How do you decide what person is going to tell the story?
Yeah, so point of view almost always comes to me early on, that I'll know, like I'll just hear this little voice in my head, and sometimes that voice is speaking directly to me. That what makes it becomes a second person, meaning the you. Others, I'm sort of listening in to their voice, and that would be a first person. And then other stories, I just sort of see from back a little bit, and then that would be the third person. So, and then the first story, Reef of Plagues, the one that was written for the Berlin Literature Festival, that was a first person plural. That's because I was sort of speaking for all the people who lived on whatever island this is, who were actually doing the hard work of cleaning the coral and trying to keep the coral alive.
There's one story in here, I'm not going to remember the full title. The principal character is Adam.
Oh, Adam.
And he is challenged.
Yeah.
And I think you did a remarkable job with that, because I've seen stories and some longer fiction written from that kind of point of view, somebody who's mentally not all present. But it looks almost always, not yours, awkward.
Yeah.
It's an educated person trying to write down to this person's level. Yours seems absolutely authentic. Was that a difficult task?
No, because it's that one, a story like that is just sort of channeled. It's like I just heard Adam in my head, and I just wrote down his story. And because it is a difficult character, that would be almost impossible to do for book length. To keep. Now, I mean, I could do it for book length. It would be hard to maintain. It would be hard for a reader to always just be in that head as well, to just be.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that short fiction can do. You can experiment a lot more with short fiction than a novel. Like I wouldn't take his voice for a novel length, but for a short story.
I had little echoes there of reading Faulkner and some of his first person things that are really tough to follow.
Really. Yeah, that's right. And so that's hard. He could be in a novel where there's other points of view, and he just shows up. The book that's coming out next year has a character.
What is the title of that again?
Oh, that one's Arroyo Circle. Arroyo, like the Western Gully, Arroy.
Arroyo, Arroyo.
Arroyo is, and that comes out next year by Green Writers Press out of Vermont. And so that has a few points of view. And one of the points of view is it's an alcoholic scientist. So and physicist, he's really like out there. And so that's a voice that would have been hard to do. Oh, and he's got a little story in here. So he's got Infant Kettering.
Kettering.
Yeah, is actually that character's voice.
Ah.
Yes. And so sometimes when I'm writing a novel, you jump ahead and you maybe make a piece of short fiction just to play with that voice or to resolve other issues. That did become a chapter in the end. Not exactly like that, but that he was a jump ahead because I needed to work on the voice. So.
We are almost out of time. I want to ask you a couple technical questions.
Yep.
What is your schedule writing, or do you not have a schedule?
Yeah. Oh, I have a schedule. I wake up and I write. I just I write basically from 7:30 in the morning. I try to get to noon, but 11 o'clock is good too. You get pretty exhausted.
Pretty much every day.
Pretty much every day. Pretty much every day. And so I don't always write every day, but I just put myself there because unless you are in front of that computer or writing pad, I can't read my handwriting, so I can't do that. But in front
So
of the
you don't write.
I have done that in the past, but actually my handwriting has gotten so bad I can't read it. So
I asked Tim O'Brien, the novelist, once what the most important thing about writing was. He said, putting in the butt time.
Putting in the butt time,
Just
getting in the chair. You make a
answer.
date with yourself, and even if nothing is happening, is coming with writing, I'll transcribe notes. I always have writing type things that need to be done.
So you would advise sitting down and making yourself work, whether you happen to be inspired or not.
Oh yeah, there's not really inspiration. That comes from the writing, not the other way around.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. JoeAnn Hart, I want to thank you for being on the Writers' Block this evening and talking about High Wire Act.
Mm-hmm.
High Wire Act. The sales will skyrocket now that you've been on the show.
Yeah.
I appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody in TV land as well for being watching the Writers' Block this evening. If you've learned something about JoeAnn Hart's art, the short story collection, or her other books and awards, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you again next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.